Chapter 13, Captured. Immediately after this agreement, however, I was taken with a long attack of fever, brought on by my fright and exhaustion during the night of my burial. I was ill for several months, and during that time we were hidden in another house, for we feared lest soldiers from the Hague should track me to our house in Scheveningen. The two other women, who were taken prisoners at the time when I was, had not been dwellers in Scheveningen, but in the Hague itself, and we had not been able to discover what was done with them. 1537 A.D. It was winter, and a new year, before I had recovered strength sufficiently to leave Scheveningen, though Gaspar and I were married a little before that, by an Anabaptist minister who was under sentence of death at the stake if he could be found. Inasmuch as my cousin Stephen dared not risk his life by becoming an Anabaptist, though he believed us to be right according to the precepts of the New Testament, he could not gain Thyra. She was firm in declaring that she would flee with Gaspar and me rather than accept the home that Stephen and his mother would gladly have given her on board their boat. Yet even I myself urged her not to decide hastily, for I knew how truly she loved Stephen, and I feared she would find being parted from him a greater trial than she anticipated. And who knew whether she would ever see him again? But she was most decided. "I have not chosen hastily," she told me, her voice quivering. "I will not marry a man who stands a coward before the duty that he believes God's word commands him to perform. Editha, these are times when death is better than life, if life must be purchased by cowardice. If Stephen loves his life better than he does the Lord, he is no fit man for me." Gaspar intended that he and Thyra and I should go to England, but, being almost discovered and captured in the attempt, we fled in terror to the shores of the Zuyder Zee. Our next 3 years were spent in fleeing from one place to another, sometimes in winter skating, under cover of the fog, from the pursuit of the enemies of the Anabaptists. Sometimes we stayed in one place as long as 6 months, and then a new danger would confront us, and we would fly again. So 3 years passed. 3 years in which Anabaptists prayed to God for the coming of religious freedom. 1540 A.D. It was on the day our little boy Hendrik was 1 year old that we heard of the arrival in the Low Countries of the Emperor Charles V. The coming of the Emperor was the beginning of the renewal of the grievous persecutions against the heretics, but chiefly against the Anabaptists. For it was our sect which was most persecuted at this time. Several severe edicts were issued against Anabaptist persons and writings. Always, through these 3 years of wandering, we had been minded to go to England, especially after we heard that, in 1536, King Henry had ordered that the English people should be allowed to have the Bible in their own tongue. "It is wonderful! It is wonderful!" I said to Gaspar. "Can it be true? Or is it only wild news come across the sea?" We did not know whether to believe it or not. It seemed so strange a thing for King Henry to do after fighting the New Testament so fiercely. But while we wondered whether we dared go to England, I one day met a woman who told me that the year before this, 14 Hollanders who had fled to England were there accused of being Anabaptists and were put to death, and 10 others only saved themselves by recanting. Moreover, we heard that in the articles of religion set forth in England, the sect of the Anabaptists was mentioned and condemned. There was certainly no religious liberty in England. It will not be safe for us to go there, Gaspar concluded. So we stayed, fleeing from one place to another, as I have said, and enduring such hardships that again we thought of going to England. But again, in 1539, we heard that an injunction had been issued there against those who held the opinions of the Anabaptists or possessed their books. And that same year, too, there came fleeing from England 16 men and 15 women who had been banished for opposing infant baptism. Suppose we had gone to England and then been sent back to the Low Countries, we thought, when we saw this poor company. So we stayed. And the next year, as I have said, the Emperor Charles V came to the Low Countries, and the persecutions that the Anabaptists had to endure grew more fierce than before. Gaspar and Thyra, little Hendrik and I, at this time had our home and place of refuge in the lower part of an old windmill, in a somewhat lonely country spot outside of Delft, for we gradually turned in our wanderings and came back toward the direction from which we had first started. I had wished to go toward that portion of the Low Countries again, if we ever thought we could dare do so, for I was anxious to see if, in any way, I could obtain word of Stephen and my aunt. We had not heard from them once in all our wanderings, and I suspected that Stephen, who had of course known that at first we had intended going to Norwich in England, had never heard of our failing to escape hither. So possibly Stephen might have afterward left the Low Countries and gone back to England himself with his mother, thinking to find us there. I knew that had been Stephen's intention if we went, and I was sure he must have lost track of us, for he would not have been willing to give up Thyra so easily. Perhaps he had heard how nearly we were discovered the night of our attempt to flee to England. Perhaps he thought that we had all been taken and killed at that time. It was possible that he had mourned us as dead. Whatever had been his thought, I was glad that our flight had led us this far toward the district in which Stephen and his mother had been wont to follow the canals. One afternoon, Gaspar and I had been away from the windmill, he working and I getting some provisions from the market at Delft. I was to meet him at a certain spot outside the city, and we were to go home together. After I was past the rampart and the moat of Delft, however, I was greatly startled. Among a number of people who were passing, I came face to face with him who had been one of the monks at my old home of Caversham in England. I shrank instantly with fear of detection, but I almost as immediately recollected that he could hardly know me. I had changed and grown up since then, and his eyes had not seemed to show the slightest recognition as we passed each other. It was over in an instant, but I had received such a shock that I could feel myself tremble. He could not have known me, I kept assuring myself. In this dress, and grown older as I am, he could not have known me. My hands shook, and I shivered. Cold chills crept over me. After I was out of sight of people, I ran. Gaspar was waiting for me at our appointed spot, and we hastened home to the windmill. Once securely shut in there, behind the stout door with its bars, Thyra, Gaspar, and little Hendrik with me, I felt more safe. I knew King Henry had spies on the continent, but no one would have any motive for tracing a poor, insignificant person like me. Not even a priest, baffled by my father's escape from England, would be likely to trace me here. I told Gaspar and Thyra of the English monk, and they agreed with me that there was no danger, especially as the priest had not known which way I went. And yet, so near had I come to danger that I was haunted by the thought of it. How had we dared come so near this pleasant city of Delft? Did I not remember hearing that the Reformation had made a stir there, and that 10 years ago a painter on glass named David Joris, who afterward turned to the Anabaptists, had obstructed a Catholic procession, and as a punishment was whipped, imprisoned, and had his tongue bored? It was horrible to think of, and that had happened in Delft, the city so near us. And Joris's own mother had had her head cut off in Delft 3 years before. Why had I not thought more of these things? A terror struck me, and then I resolutely tried to be brave. We came here because we thought it more safe than to stay where we were, I said to myself. We are in the hands of God. There is no safe place for an Anabaptist in all the Low Countries. At least I know of none. This windmill is as safe as any other place. If our enemies discover us, we cannot help it. I will leave it all in God's hand. If it is His will to take us quickly to heaven by the sword or by fire, His will be done. He has kept us alive hitherto. Our lives are His. So I quieted myself. I will not talk more to Gaspar and Thyra about it, I resolved. I am foolish to be worried. The priest did not know me. I hushed Hendrik to sleep. Gaspar had lain down to rest early, for he was tired. He had worked hard. Hours after the 3 others were asleep, I lay awake listening to the rustle of the windmill overhead. I softly raised myself on my elbow and strained my nerves to hearken. The low rustle of the windmill continued. I could hear little Hendrik's soft breathing, and I thought how dear he was to me, and what a comfort. Long I leaned there, listening, hardly breathing myself, listening to every sound. My elbow tiring with the strain, I lay softly down again and drew beneath the covering, for the old windmill was cold at times. A drowsiness came upon me. I slept a while and then awoke. We are safe, I thought. No evil has befallen us. Again, I raised myself on my elbow and leaned and listened to the windmill's sails. The world seemed peaceful. Why had I been afraid? There was the sudden sound of a swift, awful blow on the door of the windmill. I sprang up, my heart beating swiftly. I trembled so that I could hardly stand. Blow on blow fell upon the door. The walls were of stone, but the stout door of wood. Gaspar had sprung up. A form hurried to us through the dark, and Thyra caught hold of my hand without a word. Blow after blow. We could hear the angry voices of men cursing in Spanish, and high over all, there came the piercing sound of an English voice.
Kill them! Kill them! Anabaptists! Heretics! Accursed of God! Kill them! Kill them!
The voice rose into a spasm of fury. The old door was stout. The blows rained down.
Kill them! Kill them!
Shrieked the English voice, wild with rage.
Ah, that is right. The door breaks, does it not? Harder. They are there. They are there. Ah, it is not so easy to escape. We shall have them soon. Harder.
Who should shriek in English at such a time? Touch or Spanish was what we were wont to hear. I could not recognize the voice, but my heart misgave me that the monk of Caversham stood outside the door.
Anabaptists, heretics, Munsterites.
Yells and shrieks assailed us. The door was evidently giving way, stoutly barred as it had been. There was one window in the windmill, and thither we climbed to look out. It was on the other side from the door. By the wavering flame of torches and by scanty moonlight, we saw a number of Spanish soldiers guarding a company of prisoners. In front of them stood the man who shrieked in English. He waved his hands in excitement. His voice came more clearly to my ears.
Anabaptists, accursed, accursed, accursed.
But no flash from any torch made his face clear to me. A sound of splintered wood. We could not see the door or the soldiers there. "If I had but a rope," groaned Gaspar. "Perhaps in the darkness I could let you down unseen. Oh, my Editha, that you should fall into the hands of yonder men!" He sprang away from the window and tore some of the rough bedding into strips. Soon he was beside me, knotting the strips together. His breath came hurriedly, and he and I tugged at the knots to see if they were strong enough. "Now," he whispered, "now." There was a wild outcry of triumph below. "Quick," whispered Gaspar. He had tied the rope around me. Thyra handed up the baby, wrapped in the covering and still sleeping.
Kill them! Kill them!
Shrieked that English voice of madness. Gaspar tried to help me out of the window. The ground seemed so far below. I wondered if the rope was strong enough. Gaspar led me down swiftly and carefully. I was halfway down. I could hear the shouts and the blows on the other side of the windmill. I was 2/3 down.
Anabaptists, Munsterites.
My feet were on the ground. With despairing fingers, I pulled at the knot where Gaspar had fastened me to the rope. Would it never come undone? Would these people see me? I slipped out of the rope at last. It passed upward and out of sight, and I crouched close to the windmill's side and held my baby to my heart. The staunch old door! If it could but hold out a little longer. The sound of splintered wood again. Thyra came flying down beside me. She loosed herself from the rope, and we waited. There was a crash. A succession of crashes. The sound of wood that broke and fell. The shout of men who rushed inside the windmill. The partial vision of a man who shot down the rope and dropped beside me. It was Gaspar. "Keep on this side of the windmill," he whispered. He snatched baby Hendrik, and we ran. Inside the windmill there were shouts and yells.
Kill them! Kill them! Kill them!
Screamed the English voice. Hendrik began to cry, disturbed in his sleep. Gaspar hushed the child, and we ran. Oh, we were going to escape. After all, the English monk would be baffled. Nobody would be found in the old windmill. We were to escape with our lives and our New Testaments. For night and day I always carried mine with me, and I was sure that Gaspar and Thyra had theirs. I would not have wished to lose my English Testament, though now I could read Dutch easily. Alas! What was that outcry behind us?
There they go! There they go!
Came the scream of the English monk.
There! There!
He was after us, himself and 6 of the soldiers. Come this way, panted Gaspar, and Thyra and I ran in the direction he went. Hendrik, thoroughly aroused, began to cry loudly, notwithstanding all Gaspar's efforts. The child cried for me, and I was forced to take him, lest his outcries should surely discover us to our pursuers. We fled on. The soldiers gained upon us. The English priest was left far behind. Oh, could we run no faster? Here they came, nearer, nearer. I was so exhausted that I almost fell. Gaspar half carried me as we sped on. The soldiers were upon us. We were taken, driven headlong with blows. We were hurried back to the windmill. The English monk and the soldiery greeted us with shouts of derision, and we were added to the number of other prisoners inside the guarding band. There were about 30 of our fellow prisoners, men, women, and children, and I judged from the English monk's remarks that we were all Anabaptists. The soldiery formed a ring about us and began to discuss what would better be done. Should the prisoners be immediately butchered, or should we be reserved for some other doom? There was a long wrangle.
Was not your father? You hid in the faggot pile in Caversham, in England?
Savagely inquired the English monk, turning to me. He knew me then. I was silent. She is Dutch, interposed a Spanish soldier. All Dutch do not speak English.
She is English,
affirmed the monk with a fierce frown, but the voice of the leader of the soldiery rang out, commanding the prisoners to march. We rose. My baby Hendrik kept his arms around my neck. Let me carry him, whispered Gaspar, but the baby clung to me.
Go on, Anabaptists,
Scornfully cried a soldier, aiming a blow at Gaspar.
We will take you to a place where you shall fare worse than the windmill.
That may well be, answered Gaspar calmly. But know you that the religious freedom which the Anabaptists ask will come some day to all the Low Countries, despite the Emperor Charles, great as he is. It will come, for it is God's decree. Beware, lest you be found to fight against God. The Spanish soldier, perhaps not understanding all that my husband said, for Gaspar had spoken in Dutch, merely made the sign of the cross and muttered an imprecation against heretics. But another of our captors, evidently understanding more perfectly, shrieked,
Freedom? We will teach you what freedom means.
and Gaspar was silent, knowing that to say anything was useless. But an Anabaptist woman beside me murmured in my ear as we were driven on, Your husband speaks truly. There will be religious freedom some day, whether we live to see it or not. God hears the prayers of the Anabaptists. Gaspar managed to reach my side once more. The baby had grown very heavy. Let me carry him, again whispered Gaspar. But Hendrik clung to me. Oh, my baby, to think it was the last time your arms clasped my neck. The soldiers drove us on a long way through the half-lit dark, mocking us with shouts, cursing us, threatening us with torture, with burning, with beheading, with a living burial, with drowning, all in the name of the Emperor. We had stumbled on for several hours. I was growing so weary that I could hardly carry Hendrik, who kept wide awake, his bright eyes fixed on the lights and the men, and his soft, warm little arms clinging around my neck. I was so tired that I wavered in my walk, but Hendrik would not willingly go to Thyra, and I dared not force him to do so, for fear of what would happen if he should cry. My boy, I am so thankful that I held him those last few minutes. We had come near a canal when one of the brutal soldiers sprang forward to me.
"Give me the child,"
he roughly commanded in Dutch. "No," I answered. I shook my head and clasped my boy tightly, for a dreadful fear shot through me. But the soldier's fierce hands tore the child from me. Hendrik screamed, and the soldier struck him. I sprang to the man and snatched at my boy, but the soldier knocked me down. His sneering voice arose.
"See, see," he mocked. "See me play the priest. Anabaptists, I can baptize a child. See?"
And before I could gain my feet, the soldier had thrown Hendrik far out in the canal. There was a cry from the child, a splash in the water.
"My boy, my baby boy, he was gone,"
I shrieked and plunged through the soldiers. But they caught me and drove me back. I saw Gaspar struggle like a madman with the men who held him. It was all over. Not another cry came from the canal. The flickering lights showed no ripple on the far surface of the water. The English monk laughed. Such a laugh. I think devils must laugh like that. The end of chapter 13.